And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Hank Queen, who had 3 near-death experiences, which we're going to talk about and more. Hank, thank you for joining me and welcome.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate you taking the time to do this, and I especially appreciate this service and the gift that you offer so many by doing this work. I know there are a lot of people out there with deep questions about life and afterlife, and a lot of people who are grieving um, and wondering what happened to those they love and if they're okay. So I appreciate you.
Well, we appreciate you being willing to come and share your story. And on that note, let's start with your first NDE and go from there.
Okay, just a little background. I grew up in West Virginia, originally born and lived in a coal mining town there, and then moved into a larger city. When I was 14, I enrolled in Red Cross lifeguard training because my older sister did that, and I wanted to do everything that she did. And I was about 4'8" and weighed 75 pounds, so there was no way in the world I would ever qualify to be an actual lifeguard. But we had these two guys that ran the training, and they were the employees at the municipal pool there in the town. And they were both recently out of the Marines. Really big, really strong, really buff, really hardcore. So we did our training and actually did pretty good at it. But at some point they decided that the training wasn't demanding enough, and they went way off the guardrails on the protocol for the training. They started making us doing a lot of strength building exercises too, which was good for me. But the final straw was when they decided to make it even more challenging by having us be fully clothed during all of our training. So we had to wear a long sleeve sweatshirt, blue jeans, tennis shoes for all of our swimming. And so the first night we were supposed to do that, I was really worried. Typical teenager, didn't want to embarrass myself or make a fool out of myself. So I brought my clothes to the training. The pool closed for about an hour between public use and then the training beginning. And I asked the lifeguards, can I eat my dinner there and then practice swimming a little before the training started? And so it was just me and those two guys there. Everybody else was gone. I put on the clothes. I got in the shallow end. Felt very awkward and very just kind of yucky. But I swam around a little and got used to it. And in a point of foolishness, I decided to swim off in towards the deep end. And still don't really know how or why, but I took a full, big, deep inhale of water and realized right away I was in serious trouble. Managed to get back up to the surface, but I couldn't even make the slightest sound, couldn't breathe, went through this really panic-driven state, and then realized that I was going to die. And I sank, and it all went black, and I was just overwhelmed with this deep sense of peace and calm. And then I heard a sound, and I remember my feet landing gently on the bottom of the pool, and that was the last physical sensation I had. But I heard this sound, and it sounded like these sound bowls that you hear at times. But if you can imagine like 100 of these, all different tones, like from extremely low to extremely high, all sounding in perfect harmony at once, that's what I heard. I somehow felt drawn to that sound and moved there, don't know how. And as I moved towards the sound, I saw a light. And as I moved towards the light, I saw this tunnel, which is pretty typical in a lot of NDEs. And I went through that tunnel and emerged into this space where there wasn't a light, but there were billions and billions of lights, little golden lights like stars, all around me in this universe of just these golden lights. And I started moving towards them. Some of them approached me. And they were beings, but they were not humans. Like they were just these golden orbs. And they greeted me. I knew some of them. I can't even explain how I knew them, how we communicated. But the overarching feeling in that space was this immense feeling of total embrace and love, peace, compassion, and bliss. I've never felt anything like that in my life before. I had a really challenging childhood, a lot of trauma, torture, abuse. And so my experience with love was not very robust. Um, and it just felt like the greatest coming home ever. Um, so I was thoroughly relaxing and enjoying this experience, starting to feel some question about what was going on in my mind because I had a very staunch Christian upbringing, and I didn't know how I could already know many of these beings that came to me, welcomed me back, and all that. And then there was this moment where I felt this tug. I was like a yo-yo on the end of the string, and I came whipping back into here. I was laying face down in the grass. I remember my legs were all scratched up and bleeding. I was cold and wet, and they were giving me, they were resuscitating me and giving me CPR. And I realized I was back here. I jumped up off the ground and I tried to beat the crap out of both of these guys. It was like a mouse taking on an elephant. Um, and I remember one of them grabbed me by the hair to hold my head back as I was swinging punches and kicking and trying to bite him. I mean, I literally went insane. I've never been in a rage like that in my life. So angry that they made me come back. And I mean, I realized at this point I chose to come back. Um, they were very concerned about me, and I asked them not to tell anyone what had happened because it was beyond my ability to really comprehend what I'd gone through. And I was also afraid they would scrub me out of the training at that point, really silly. So they didn't, but I know now they also didn't they agreed not to do that because of their own liability. And later, next day, I left. I came back and I talked to the guy who was the boss of him and himself and the other guy. And he told me that when they agreed to let me go out, they went into the pump house, the office, and were doing their paperwork and examining their water samples. And he said he went out to check to see how I was doing, but I wasn't anywhere in sight. The water was calm. So he thought I'd just changed my mind. He went back in. He said about 12, 15 minutes later, he got this feeling something was very wrong. And he went back out again, still didn't see anything, but he walked over to the edge of the pool and looked down at the 12-foot deep drain. And he saw my body lying on the bottom. So I'd been gone a full 15 minutes into this experience, I guess. And they resuscitated me. So um, I learned in that experience so much, and so much more even came into question about what I thought I knew or what I'd been told. And I certainly learned that this is not all there is by any means, and that there's this place that we all go eventually. And in that place, it really is home. It's in the finest and best sense you could ever even imagine. And it's just filled with this love and people that you love or beings you love and beings that love you. It really made me question my faith, though, because my experience was completely unlike anything that I had ever heard of. I had never at that point in my life ever heard the word reincarnation. And I didn't come across that until I was around 20 years old, actually. And I realized instantly that that's what the meaning of them knowing me and me knowing them was. I knew them before I came here, and I went back to them after I left, and others. Um, and I'm not condemning Christianity in any way because I don't think there's a religion out there that really supports the direct experience and knowing that I had. but it was very powerful. It was very life-changing. I was not on a good path because of my childhood trauma, and it changed my life. It gave me a very different perspective on life. That rather than just not wanting to be here all the time, I realized it's okay to be here because I know where I'm going when it's over. And there came points in my life after that where I got very serious about suicide. And each time I would um, come very close to that point. At one point, when I was 20, I stood on a bridge railing at 3 a.m. in the morning for over an hour trying to decide whether to fall forward or not. I decided I don't need to go there now. I came here, I realized I came here for some reason, and it didn't feel complete to me. So, so that part, that was the first NDE. And I saw people very differently. I saw life very differently. I can't say that I became a better person because of that, but I certainly became a more peaceful and loving person because of that. But I also became a more doubting person, if you will, about what I was learning and seeing in life and how real it was or how real it wasn't. It was very much like this is the dream space. And when I died, I woke up. That's the way it felt to me. So life had this kind of sense of an unreality to me from that point forward. At times it was very, very real, but I always realized that it's it's not what it might appear to be, is the way I would best describe it. Um, so I went through um, that learning, and I want to explain a little bit about these three states I went through: the the physical state of drowning and being here, then this passing through, and then this exit into this other space, which I've learned since then. But um, I think of this in there's three levels of how we participate in our lives in our own way. One of them is here, the thing we call reality, 3D space, all of that. And then there's this, I can only call it a space in between. Um, in that particular experience, and I can talk more about my other experiences after this if you want. Um, I went through that space in between through this tunnel, but there's this great void, is all I can describe it as. It's this place of unexpressed potential, and um, and I have visited that in the second two near-death experiences. But the tunnel passed me through that into what I have learned to call my own words, soul space. It's where souls exist, congregate, hang out, if you will, heal, process all these kinds of things as souls. Um, and then we want to come back into earth, incarnate. We pass through that great void and back into, a physical body here. Um, but in that space in between in particular, it's very interesting to understand more about that. I'm sure you've noted there's great variety in the NDEs that you've heard stories of. People experience very different things. A lot of religions, I believe, the teachings are based on people having near-death experiences and bringing back stories about what they saw and experienced and all that. And what I've learned is that if you go to that space in between first, actually go there, not pass through, that you create another reality for yourself, a complete, very realistic, um, very detailed reality for yourself there. And it can be based on what you've been taught will happen to you when you die. So if you're taught you're going to go to heaven with streets, paved with gold and all that, you'll experience it. And it's very real, very real. If you are from a different religious background, you may have a very different experience. Um, what surprised me after I understood this is that I didn't have the Christian definition of afterlife. I didn't have that at all. Um, but I've done a lot of work in that space and with people who've passed and are in that space for various reasons. And if you believe that you are doomed to hell, or your version of hell, you're going to experience it there. And those experiences are very real, and they continue the reason why you make these journeys. You can work through karma there, you can sorts of things that you're doing here. But at some point, you wake up to I'll call the unreality of that place, just like I realize this is a dream space. That's actually a dream space too. And you go home. And it's not that you're stuck there or anything. They're like in the Tibetan teachings, it's called the Bardo. And even in Christianity, it's recognized as a place that you can go before your choice is made to go to heaven or hell. But it's it exists and it's there for your benefit as well. So I think most people who have any NDEs go there, and I know I did. And you have an experience there which is created by you as an ultimate creator, even if it's populated by many other people or beings or whatever. It's a creation because of your ability to innately create, because of your divinity.
Do you think it's possible, if somebody wants to, that they can skip the in-between and go directly to the soul space?
Yeah, that's in essence what I did, Jeff, the first time around.
Mm.
Um, and I think I was fortunate in doing that in a way, because I I don't want to call it the confusion of the space in between, but I think because I was flatlined for so long, that's where I went. I think my other two near-death experiences were 10 to 12 minutes of being flatlined. And I did not in either of those go to soul space. I went to the space in between in the great void. But I learned very valuable things and received very valuable gifts while I was there.
When you first got back and you were angry and fighting the lifeguard, were you angry because you were brought back, or were you
Yes,
angry? Okay.
very much so. I I mean, I never felt that they should have saved me. They should have, that's never even crossed my mind. I knew at many levels it was one of the greatest gifts I could ever receive, but I also didn't want to have to like give it back. You know what I mean? I felt like I went home and I didn't want to come back. I didn't really want to be alive here anymore at that point in my life, and I wanted to be done with this experience. And so I thought the lifeguards, were responsible for making me come back, which is silly. Um, and I mean, I have gratitude now, great gratitude that they did save my life. And I think it's remarkable that they did. And I appreciate them for what they did. But yeah, and then anger faded as I realized I am back and I had that experience, and I began to develop great gratitude for it. I, um, I never talked about it to anybody, and probably not for 30 years before I had the first conversation with anybody about it. And that's when there was more awareness and understanding of, my first time I heard of the phrase near-death experience, and understood that it had happened to other people, not just me. But I kept it a secret, and I can't really tell you why. It wasn't like I was ashamed of it, but I, uh, I don't know why. It never felt comfortable. It felt very sacred and very, very private to me to have that experience.
You talked about being here for a reason. Have you ever figured out what that is?
There's different levels of that understanding that I have developed. For me, the understanding is it's not for some great purpose. My ego wanted that early on. Like you have great things to do here, or important things to do here, or powerful things to do here. And I went through those stages, like any normal human being might. But I've come to understand that one of the primary reasons I'm here is just to experience. I chose to come here. I chose to come here to have experiences that I can't have, for example, in soul space. And I've also come to understand that I chose to experience soul space from a different point of me. What I've learned is that I believe we all have three levels of existence. Um, my understanding of all, creator, all of us, is that in the beginning there's this eternal consciousness. That's all there is. And there's nothing that we would call reality or physicality or even energy or any state other than eternal consciousness, which knows itself, it's self-aware. And that eternal consciousness decided to experience itself. And to experience itself, it needed to create different perspectives on itself, and that's us. So there is this spark of eternal consciousness that is not separated from that whole, but is kind of like it's a part of that whole, but can experience separately from itself. So it's like your finger. Your finger can experience something that the rest of your whole body's not, like touch something hot, right? So we're all extensions of that eternal consciousness, and I call that our divine spark. And this divine spark of us wanting to experience, first just experiences eternal consciousness and the view of that, of other divine sparks and all that. But if you want to take that experience to a different level, you can decide to be born into a soul. And souls are not you. They're a construct that your divinity inhabits. So it's made out of whatever it is. It's not the energy that we're used to here, or even the energy that energy workers and others believe in, but it is a construct. It has, it exists. It has organs that are called chakras. It's functional. It can meld itself into physical forms if you decide as that divine spark and the soul to incarnate. So here we sit today, you and me, and we have a physical body, and we have a soul, and we have this divine spark. So it's all us, but you could think of it like your feet are your physical body, your heart's your soul, and your mind is your eternal consciousness part of you. You're all in one integrated state of being, but maybe your feet don't know the rest of you exists. You know, understand what I mean? It's the most dense and the most connected to Earth. So one of the things I began to be able to do more effectively is first understand this three different frequencies, levels, dimensions of whatever you want to call them, of self, of my I am, and begin to harmonize and connect those in a better way, because when you're born into a physical body, you don't really know anything than what your mind can pick up and your senses can pick up. You feel very separated. You feel very alone. You feel like there's nothing else here but you. And that near-death experience has made me very aware of my soul, which my soul has its own, and that's true of my divinity too. So often those free wills and choices are not very aligned or harmonized, but there's work and there's ways that you can do that so that you more fully embody all aspects of yourself into this human experience, which um, is the other purpose. That when you ask me about my purpose here, that's the other purpose, is not only experience this but experiencing in at every dimension, every way that I exist. And to know that I came here for that purpose, and to be able to become really who and what I am in my essence, which I believe for me is just love and compassion.
You were with beings on the other side, and I guess you had some sort of telepathic conversations with them. Did you
Right.
bring back any message from them?
I would say the most important thing I learned from them in that experience, and I have had it, I can explain, I have connected to other beings in my other two NDEs that gave me more explicit things. The message is that we are all the same, the same thing. We're unique, but we're the same. And so we're one thing, we're all in unity, and we're all okay is not the right word for it. Um, it's it's just about love. And love is just a frequency on the opposite end of a pole, if you're into duality and polarity of fear. Hate's not on the other end of that. Fear's on the other end of that. And so underlying a lot of what we do and what we say and how we behave, and um, I would say the ills that befall us is fear. And and to know that we have this birthright, literally, of just pure love. And if we can accept that and embrace that, we can more fully experience this life and all it has to offer from a place of wonder and love and compassion. Um, it just brings, it just has brought me into this place where life is so much fuller, so much richer, has so much magic in it, that when you're in fear base of not enough, not worthy, not lovable, whatever the knots are, you can't really fully embrace or even see or experience life, because you're always looking for something to be afraid of. Not what life offers you, but what is life presenting to you that you need to be afraid of. And that's the message I got, is literally um, live your life, live it, embrace that life. It's a huge gift to be here, a huge gift. And unwrap that gift and embrace that gift and partake of that gift. It's a banquet, it's not crumbs at the table.
All right, let's move forward to your second NDE.
So that was when I was 14. And and because of some whatever, I had a genetic heart issue that was first identified when I was 18. Kept me out of the Vietnam War, but all I knew is I had an irregularity in my heartbeat that would skip sometimes, and sometimes it would skip a lot of times in a row. Um, when I was in my 50s, I was diagnosed with something called HCM, which is means a disease of the heart. And it was causing me a lot of troubles. I was getting fluid backing up in my lungs. I thought I had asthma, which I didn't. Um, and I had these irregular heartbeats. So this, I was diagnosed as it was really serious. At the time, I was working at the Boeing company, um, my 28th year there. And so I started getting every 3 months repeated checks on how my heart was doing, because it seemed to be progressing pretty rapidly at that point. I was under a lot of stress. I had a very demanding leadership position there that I don't need to go into, but trying to manage way too many people and way too much money, and taking way too much responsibility on myself for it. So in 2004, my cardiologist told me that I probably had less than a year to live.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it glitched earlier and I didn't get to hear. What
Oh,
what is the name of your condition or was?
HCM, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy.
Okay.
And so I had a ventricular, they're called premature ventricular contractions. So some people, AFib is relatively common. This is also not so common, but when it really gets bad, it almost always ends up in death. It's like a sudden death. Um, it also can cause what I was experiencing. My heart was quite enlarged and very inefficient at its pumping. Um, that was why I was having fluid buildup, a lot of lung congestion from fluid collecting in my lungs, that sort of thing. Um, so I took that diagnosis seriously. I resigned 2 weeks later in my job, and I moved from Seattle to Central Oregon. Thought I was done with it. Um, but one of the last things my cardiologist told me is that it seems like however this has happened, it seems like you're recovering from the congestive side of this. But he said, remember that um, sudden death threat is still looming for you somewhere. And he warned me that um, really intense pain or really intense fear, stress, that kind of thing can trigger that event. But I forgot all about that. And so about 14 years ago now, I was preparing to leave to go teach a workshop in Seattle. I did a lot of corporate consulting and teaching after I left. Um, through idiocy, slammed my own hand in the car door of my truck, and the latch pin pierced my finger, and it was really painful. I mean, it directly hit the bone. And I went inside with my ex-wife and was washing the blood out of my hand because I still need to go to the airport to catch my flight. And I felt my heart doing its thing, not beating regularly. And I laid down on the floor because I felt like I was going to pass out. And then all of a sudden, my heart stopped beating. And have about 5 to 10 seconds of consciousness when your heart stops like that. Um, it's eerie to have the complete silence in your own body because whether you pay attention to it or not, you always have some sounds of blood in your ears and all that. And that was gone. And then everything went black. And I found myself in this dark space in between, making my way home. I realized that at that point that I had died again, and I was moving home. And but it was different. I didn't go into the tunnel, you know. But this space felt familiar to me too, and it was okay. I knew if all I had to do was move forward, I would go into that soul space place. And on my way there, I heard all these voices shouting and all angry, all yelling. And I thought, this is not here. It's supposed to be a place of love and peace and bliss. But I felt drawn to go in that direction. And as I got closer and closer and everything got louder and louder, I realized every one of those voices was one of my voice, was me, all yelling, all trying to tell each other what to do, all yelling each other, be quiet and listen. Um, so of course, the first stupid thing I did was, as I got there, I yelled at all of them to be quiet, and I just became another voice joining this crowd of voices. There were no visuals, um, just darkness and this hearing. And I understood in that moment of this flash of understanding, somehow I was fractured. There were there was parts of me that weren't all of me put together in some way. And no understanding of why that was or what to do about it. But I realized that I couldn't go home in that way because all the me that was going home wasn't all of me. If that makes any sense at all, it was very confusing to me. So I made this choice to wake up, to come back, and instantaneously I was back in my body. I couldn't move. All I could do was open my eyes and lying on the floor, looking up, still have my sunglasses on. and my ex was on the phone with 911, holding it away from her on the speakerphone, screaming. And I heard the woman say, "Ma'am, you need to calm down and listen." And she said, "I can't calm down. My husband's dead." And and then she looked down, saw my eyes, and started screaming again. And this is so stupid, Jeff. I don't know what possessed me, but I held up my hand and she handed me the phone. And I said very weakly, "Hello." And the woman said, "Who is this?" And I said, "Hello." She said, "Is this the person who's dead?" And I said, "Yes." So it was um, it was a very different experience, but I understood this part of me that my life between that first experience and that second experience that um, I had come apart or had fractured or had not really integrated parts of myself in ways that I needed to do, and no clue about what that meant or what to do about it or anything around it. Um, but I had a very difficult recovery. My first NDE, um, I was fine after, physically, emotionally. I mean, I was challenged, but this NDE, I had a very difficult time after. I had some obvious brain damage. I had pretty big lapses and holes in my memory. Um, like the 2 months, almost the entire 2 months of my life before that no longer existed for me. I couldn't remember anything about it, which was shocking. Um, and physically, I spent 2 or 3 weeks just trying to recover strength and some vitality. But I was in this extraordinarily calm, peaceful state. Not long after that, about 3 or 4 days later, went on a vacation down to Palm Springs with my ex-wife, and I was sitting by this pool. I was unable to do almost anything but just sit all day long. And a magpie came up and sat on my arm, on my wrist. I don't know if you know what a magpie is, but there's these really pretty big black and white birds
Oh,
that are very skittish around people. They're very smart. And I was just watching the trees and the grass. This magpie came and sat on my wrist. I looked at it. It nodded to me and I nodded to it. And we both just sat there together looking around, looked at it again, nodded again, and it flew away. It wasn't concerned at all about me being a human. And I realized I'm not really all the way back into my body. And that eventually happened and all that. But but I started about at that point in my life doing what I would call spiritual work, trying to understand more about all that was going on around me and myself and all that. Um, and that set me on a very different path of meditation, you know, very, very curious, trying to read, trying to absorb, trying to understand, and also open to me a guide from the other side. Each time I've had these experiences, I, I would say it's done something I would call weaken the veil between what we think exists and only exists here and what's not here. And I had this very ancient grandmotherly figure, Native American, who came to me and started teaching me and explaining things to me. And I call her Grandmother Earth. Um, and she set me on this path of inner exploration and outer understanding. She taught me how to do healing work with other people and help them. Um, and so at the time, I did physical kind of body work with people, and I started integrating that work in there. So it dramatically changed the path of my life and my arc of my life, which set me up for my third near-death experience 2 years later.
after either one of those NDEs, did you notice that you had any new abilities?
Yeah, absolutely. After I came back from that experience, I could see, as long as I closed my eyes, I'd lay hands on people. I could see their energy patterns. I could see their chakras. I could see all these things in my mind somehow that I could not see before,
Hmm.
and no comprehension of before.
All right, let's move forward to your third NDE.
So, as I said, that NDE in particular, second one, set me on a path of discovery of at every level in every way. I've always been a very curious person, want to learn more. So at this point, I um, had met my now wife and maybe known her 3 months or 4 months, and started to get very curious about plant medicine, um, and in particular about ayahuasca. Never had done anything like that in my life. I had no interest in drugs or, you know, that kind of experience, hallucinogenic experiences, anything. And we had a mutual friend who conducted ayahuasca ceremonies. And so, um, with some trepidation, I have to admit, I decided to do that. Just my wife, Kim, and I, and her. And so we signed up and did an ayahuasca experience. And in that ayahuasca experience, I had my third and last NDE. Had this very beautiful experience for a long time in it. Um, and I was with my grandmother guide, and Buddha came to me. And I had no interest in Buddha or any. Buddhism is not a religion, but it's a practice. But he came to me and wanted to talk to me. And he gave me this, for me, a very life-changing message. Um, and then after that, found myself floating above earth with my grandmother guide and thanking her for this beautiful experience. And then she said, I think you're going to be okay. And I said, what? And she said, I think you're going to be okay. And everything went dark, and I fell into this black abyss, and I was swallowed by this huge dragon swimming up like a Chinese parade dragon. And I saw every single and witnessed every single thing I had ever done to cause harm to anyone, intentionally or unintentionally. And just was overwhelmed by what I saw as the karma that I had accumulated. And I decided to die. And I did. And went into that great void again and was swimming. This time it felt like swimming my way home. And I had some very different experiences there this time than I'd had before. I saw other souls making their way home too. It was like we were salmon swimming upstream to get to soul space. And for the first time in any of these experiences, I had thoughts about here. And I felt my wife Kim calling me back. And this doesn't sound very kind or compassionate, but I never had a thought about life here in either of my first two experiences. No thought about it at all, not the slightest thought. And I felt that call from her, that pull to come back. And so I stopped. And my grandmother guide appeared, and I said, can I go back? And she said, yes, if you go soon. Because she said it won't be long before your body's not going to be able to accept you back in. And and I remember negotiating with her. I I said, I am really, really done with this heart problem. And I'd like to never have that experience again because it's so sudden and it's so abrupt. And I said, can you heal me from that? And she said, yes, I can. And then I had one more thing that I had issues with, which is my lungs. And when I was 18 years old, I worked in a steel mill in Ashland, Kentucky, and I was involved in an powdered asbestos spill. Spent 45 minutes trapped in this contraption without any ability to get out, with no breathing equipment, filled with airborne asbestos. And it caused serious damage to my lungs and asbestos scarring. And, that's just a time bomb waiting for that to get out. And asked her if she could heal that. And she said, yes, I can. So as soon as she agreed to that, I found myself back in my body again. And I'm not going to go through all that. But again, every sense and ability that I had significantly heightened after the second one, went into overdrive in that experience. But I went to see a cardiologist locally here and went through a 30-day, 24/7 monitoring program, all kinds of stress tests, all kinds of examinations. And at the end of that 30 days, went to see this guy for the results, and walked into his office. He's sitting behind his desk. He's looking very grim and very somber. And he said, sit down. I said, okay. And he said, so tell me again why you think you have a heart problem. And I said, well, I've had 2 cardiac arrests. I saw a cardiologist for years. He said, well, I just want to tell you, after examining your heart and all these tests, he said, your heart is absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with your heart. And he said, and I see here on your chart that you said you had a series of scarring of your lungs. And he said, when we did chest x-rays to measure the size of your heart, your lungs are perfectly clear. And he said, so all I conclude is that you've had some of the worst medical care I've ever seen, totally misdiagnosed. And he said, and I know if you want, I will gladly testify on your behalf in a malpractice suit. And
Wow.
yeah, and I knew exactly what had happened. And I said, well, I'm not interested in that. And I said, I'm glad to hear that I'm fine. He said, no, you don't understand. I said, I do understand, and I appreciate you. Thank you. But I'm done. And I left. So that experience, I learned a lot in that experience about past lives that I never had much interest in that domain, but I understood about past lives and even the past of this life in ways that I didn't understand before. My experience is that myself and a lot of people spend very little time in the now. Most of the time, our mind is wandering around in the past or worried about what's coming in the future, but very seldom are we just in the now moment. And I've learned that you can't change the past and you really can't control the future. So why not stay in the now where you can? But that experience taught me something that about the past, that you can't change it, but in a way you can, because I learned a lot about my experience in this lifetime, my stories about what had happened to me. And a lot of my stories were around I was a victim. I felt very victimized by the perpetrators of my abuse and my trauma and all of that. And I realized that's just not true. And so when you can change your perspective on what happened, there are different gifts and learnings and wisdom you can take of that experience, but you won't experience those if you're rigid in one perspective and one view of what happened to you. So it's okay to go back and re-examine your past, but to witness it from a different place and in a different way. And mainly that's experiencing that, witnessing from a place of truth and wisdom and compassion. Compassion for yourself, and also compassion for those that were involved in that experience with you, that they're just as human as you are, and they mess up just as much as you did. And So that's given me a huge shift in my life. And I realize in that shift, all these pieces of me that I bore a witness to in my second NDE were each time I experienced great trauma, it's almost like I had a fracture of my mind and myself. And I've done a lot of work, very successful work, in bringing those all back into harmony, because each one of them holds parts of you which not only hold trauma, but great gifts for you. And the love for yourself and the love for others grows stronger and stronger as you do, as I've done that work, as I've become whole and become wholesome. I've become a person than I think I was before. So um, I guess just looking back on all that, NDEs in and of themselves can be really amazing and incredible. But for me, it's been the integration and the understanding and the full embrace of that experience. What did it teach me? What did I gain from that experience? And what can I offer others as a result of that experience that's been the most meaningful for me?
What was Buddha's message for you?
I'll just explain what happened, and then hopefully the message becomes clear out of that. I I was approached in this space by this little tiny old man floating in space with me. He had an orange sari wrapped around him, and he didn't say he was Buddha, but he was a little old bald guy, and asked me if I would sit with him. And as soon as I said yes, instantly in this full moon light under this tree, I was seated on the ground with him. And for the first 30 seconds of me just looking at him, he shifted into all these Buddha shapes, like an emerald Buddha, a stone Buddha, a golden Buddha, back to this little old man, and then eventually just stabilized. And I and I smiled. I didn't have to say it out loud, but I got the message, "Oh, you're Buddha." And he smiled because he realized I recognized who he was. And I said, "What is it that you wish to tell me?" He said, "I want to explain something to you that you don't seem to understand." And I said, "So what do you want me to understand?" "I want you to just be, Hank, just be." And he said, "Do you understand what I mean by that?" And I thought, yeah, I think I do. Like being in the now. That's the way I interpreted it. And my guide, my grandmother, had told me that several times. I was spending too much time forward and back and not enough time in the now. And he just looked at me, Jeff, and he just nodded. He just shook his head like this. He said, "I want to explain this to you in ways that maybe even you, Hank, you, like this little teeny me, could understand." And I felt humbled and maybe a little embarrassed in that moment. And he just smiled. And so I relaxed, and he said, "I want you to imagine that you're a caterpillar." And I said, "Okay." He said, "And I really want you to imagine how it would feel and what that experience would be as a caterpillar." I said, "Okay, I'm doing that." He said, "Now, as a caterpillar, you have absolutely no idea that at some point in your life, if you live long enough, you're going to go through a very significant transformation, and you're going to become something completely unknown to you, which we know as a butterfly. But you don't understand that. You have this urge at some level knowing that you're changing, but you don't know the purpose of that. You don't know the outcome of that. You don't understand it at all." And I said, "Okay, I can get that." He said, "But Hank, you're a good caterpillar, and you want to be the best caterpillar of any caterpillar that ever was. So your mind imagines all these ways that how could you be better? How could you be more loving? How could you understand something better? How could you do something better? Maybe you should meditate more. Maybe you should study more. Maybe you should heal more. Maybe you should, all these things. Because you imagine that will make you a better caterpillar because you're a caterpillar. And I said, okay. I knew he was talking about me, right? It resonated. He said, but do you understand in all those ways that you pursue being a better caterpillar, you are blocking your transformation. You're blocking your own change because your destiny is not to be a caterpillar, not to be the best caterpillar, it's to be a butterfly. And he said, so you're holding on to this state and vision of being a caterpillar. And I began to understand that at this point. And he said, so if you can just be in a state of being, allow yourself to just be in the moment and be wherever that takes you. That's what I mean by just be. He said, do you understand me now? And I actually finally got it, Jeff. I finally understood it. And I've understood it at deeper and deeper levels. But being me, I said, he smiled and I smiled and I said, but I do have a question. And he looked at me a little bit askance, I think is the word. And I said, so all these things that I am doing, like meditating, studying, helping, learning, sharing, do I need to stop all of that? And he paused and he said, here's the deal. If your heart calls you to do that, do it. He said, if your heart calls you to do that and your mind has the slightest hint of that will make you be something that you're not right now, that you should do that, you ought to do that, that always comes from mind. He said, stop, because you're not doing it because it's a part of your own purpose in life. It's because your mind thinks you should do something. And so that changed my life again. And so whenever I face decisions, even in the daily basis, what should I do today? I ask my heart what I want to do today, not should do today. And I don't know if you've ever heard, there's a book out there called Stop Shooting All Over Yourself and Others.
Oh, I haven't heard that.
Yeah. So I've stopped shitting on myself as best as I can. And I follow my heart. And that has helped me greatly after that NDE. And anyway, that was what Buddha shared with me.
Like, after watching this podcast, people may want to reach out to you and ask you questions. Are you open to that?
Absolutely.
What's the best way to contact you?
Email is good. Do you want my email address?
Sure.
It's hank@blueheronrising.com.
Do you have anything that you're working on that you want people to know about?
I have taken a lot of that I have learned and have practiced many times, and I have created, with help from my guides and other people, a whole healing modality around that for helping people. As I said earlier, largely trauma-based, but also applying some techniques to your own awakening, your own inner healing. And I offer workshops and certifications around that. I'm taking the workbook that I use to make it more aligned to the general public. So if you want to read and learn and embody some of these techniques to help yourself or help others, you can do that. And I'm also long held this desire, and I think I'm going to move ahead with it, writing a book about all of the things I've learned about what is the only way I can describe it, about understandings about reality, about the quantum veils, about creation, about existence, about soul space, about divinity, about all of it. And there was a book written years and years ago, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And my book is going to be The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe. And there's not a lot of ego or thinking I know everything about it. It's just a hope, a humble and clear offering of what I've received that third NDE experience opened for me the ability to channel. So I've done a lot of channeling and written down channelings and received a lot of information in that way, and hoping to capture some of that and share some of that. That's all.
Who are you channeling?
I channel my grandmother Earth Guide. I channel my own divinity and soul. And then I have another guide that, so it's Gaia is the name for Earth, right? And then I have a guide, Maya, that's another planet being not here. And Grandmother Earth taught me a lot about heart and body, and Maya's taught me a lot about mind and soul. So the integration of those is called the heart, body, mind, and soul. It's the four realms. And so your spirit, this divinity of you, navigates those realms, including your soul space. So it's been very helpful for me to get that understanding. And I like to put structure and organization and understanding to things. I'm an engineer by education and by life. And it's just my way of a lens I've created to look at things through, because they're really unexplainable, undefinable, but you can at least gain wisdom and knowledge about it by looking at things in certain ways.
Hank, before we finish up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
Just be. And in that state of just being, be open, be loving, be compassionate, and be kind. Be everything that you wish other people were to you.
Hank, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
And thank you, Jeff. I so appreciate you. Thank you.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.